Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ideas for the Workplace. I'm your host, Hedieh Azad, and my guest today is Kristina Lamb, who will talk about stress and burnout in the workplace. Hello, and welcome, Kristina. Thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest today. I really appreciate it.
I'm really excited to be here, Hedieh. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna start by giving an introduction to the viewers, and then we'll jump right into the questions about stress and burnout.
Sounds good.
Kristina is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and wellness specialist. Her role focuses on corporate mental health, psychological safety, and employee wellness. Kristina strives to meet people where they are with compassion and as an advocate. She firmly believes that everyone's journey towards mental health is worthy of attention and support. She maintains a part time private psychotherapy practice in addition to her role and is inspired every day by the people she works with and supports. All right. So let's start by talking about stress and the continuum of stress and what is good stress, bad stress, and all about stress, essentially.
Sounds good. Happy to. So, I think first and foremost, it can be really helpful to remember that stress is a natural human response that prompts us to act. Often, we think about stress in narrow, limiting, and negative terms. And in some ways, we can't help it. We've evolved this way to support our survival and to keep ourselves safe. So, when we broaden our view and understand that stress exists on a continuum, new possibilities kind of start to emerge for how we see ourselves and what we believe that we're capable of. So, I'm someone who really likes examples to support my own learning. So, I'm going to offer some stressors initially that would tend to sit on the tolerable to kind of positive end of the continuum. And hopefully, folks out there will find some examples helpful too. And I guess keep in mind too that this is not an exhaustive list, just to get our juices flowing in terms of how we think about things. And then even before I jump into that, I want to say that, of course, our unique experiences, our social position, our intersectionality, our exposure to trauma and violence, our access to different kinds of power and influence, as well as our financial means, are always going to be part of the fuller picture of how we experience the stressors in our lives. So we really can't separate ourselves from the context that we're in. So, with that in mind, let's say some positive stressors that would sit over here could include things like taking on a new challenge at work, setting goals around an interest or a passion, maybe traveling, challenging ourselves physically by trying a new sport or activity, intellectually by learning something new, maybe challenging ourselves emotionally by starting to lean into more difficult conversations, or even just starting to pay attention to what our bodies are telling us and naming our feelings. So when we experience stressors like this that are more tolerable or in the mild range, like the ones I just mentioned, they really remind us that we can function quite well at the edges of our comfort zones and that we do have this capacity to learn and to grow, which in turn starts to elicit feelings of excitement and fulfillment, meaning, satisfaction. We might find our confidence starts to grow and we just are rising to this challenge. And so experiences like this really do help us to stay motivated and to feel good about our lives because we're working with an amount of stress that doesn't deplete our physical, mental, emotional, social, or financial resources. It's also likely, if you're paying attention to the list, that those stressors were anticipated in some way because most of those examples I listed are very much within the sphere of our control, right? Based on choices um, that we've personally made. And they're also time bound, which supports our ability to cope and to even thrive in those situations. So, any questions there before I like just monologue on you?
No, it was, but what stood out for me and what's interesting for me is what really distinguishes like, positive stress from negative stress is that element of control and it being time bound. So I guess in a way, when we feel we're in control, if we're accepting a new challenge and it's our choice, it seems then that it's more positive. Is my understanding correct?
Definitely a good chunk of it for sure has to do with choice and working with a finite period of time. Because as we start to dip into, stressors that move from positive to mild and tolerable to over to the other end here that would be toxic, it's when we start to feel overwhelmed because our mental, emotional, physical, social, and financial resources are no longer adequate to meet the demands that we're
Mhm.
facing. So it's possible that you have a stressor where you don't have that much control, but your resources have not been totally depleted. It certainly helps when there's choice in the matter too, right? That strengthens our capacity. Definitely strengthens our capacity. So you're not wrong at all, and there's always a little bit more to the story,
Mhm.
right? So I think, features that tend to be associated with toxic stress additionally are when the stressor is totally unpredictable, when there's no foreseeable endpoint, and when we lack social support. So social support actually becomes a pretty big factor in our capacity to cope too. And the kind of the scary bit about it is, when stressors become chronic and they sit in this kind of toxic range for a really long time where our resources just get continually drained, then it can start to really impair both our physical and our mental health. So it gets to be concerning too, the length of time that we spend in the zone where we're depleted and where our social supports aren't aren't available either. See, we could look at social supports like a resource too, because they certainly are.
Right. And that's very interesting. So what are some of the examples of social support?
Oh gosh, I think it varies for people in general. I think we we probably think of family and friends first and foremost. In a work context, trusted colleagues. I like to extend social support to animals, like the animals in our lives, because I know personally my connection with my dog is a really big, tremendous source of support for me, and I don't think I'm alone there, but it's not just specific to dogs too, either. And then too, I think we can even extend beyond that to spiritual communities, to connecting there, neighbors, like you name it, right? And if we want to take it outside of to expand it even farther, the natural environment, right? Connecting with ourselves. Like we can be our own supports too. And there's so much power in people as individuals. And I think sometimes we forget how resource we can be internally and how comforting being in nature can be too. And for folks more introverted or folks who enjoy solitude, I think there's a lot of solace to be taken in being in spaces that just give you energy, even if those spaces don't have any people in them.
Yeah, thank you. That brings me to my next question, which is what are the effects of stress on our bodies? Are there any physical effects?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. It's such a good question. And there are definitely very tangible ways that our bodies experience stress. And mild stressors too, for sure. Like we might find ourselves, like even right now, I'll use myself as an example. Like I'm excited to be here with you. and I'm also a little bit nervous, right? So it's like a mild stressor for me, and I can feel my body. Like I can feel my body being warm, right? So, but this is positive. It's like totally natural and positive. But one way that my body is telling me that, oh yeah, you're experiencing some stress right now, right? But I think maybe it's more helpful for people to understand. And maybe this was your question to Hedieh, and I just like missed it as part of the fact that I'm in a little bit of a heightened state, like with my own excitement and stress. Is what happens when we sit in the chronic stressor space to our bodies, right? That's more what we're curious about. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Thank you
More
for
with
like,
the yeah, more with like the negative stress, which is chronic. There's like you said, there's no end in sight. So what are those effects?
yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you. Gosh. Okay. So I'm going to be sharing a bit of a laundry list of the way that this can impact us, and a caveat being that maybe we experience some of this stuff or a cluster of these things. So it's not an all or nothing list. And I'll also say too that the overview that I'll be sharing, kind of the bulk of the source content comes from the American Psychological Association. So, if your curiosity is piqued, listeners out there, that's a good resource to lean into. So here we go. I suspect most people probably won't be surprised because you'll probably even maybe recognize some of these things that happen for you. Okay, so kind of like top down almost tension and migraine headache pain in the lower back, upper extremities. Breathing problems can start to happen for folks who are prone to panic attacks already. Chronic stress could bring those on in a more pronounced way. There's also increases in risk for heart attack and stroke. Chronic stress is also linked to a bunch of metabolic disorders and to depression. It can trigger pain and bloating and heartburn, nausea and vomiting and bowel issues, then impact our ability to think and affect our emotions and mood. It can also make it really difficult for us to differentiate situations in which we feel safe versus situations where we feel our safety is being threatened. And I don't necessarily mean physically threatened, but maybe emotionally and mentally. We might interpret our interactions with people as more threatening due to a heightened arousal state of the autonomic nervous system. What else? My goodness. Chronic stress affects reproductive capability too and reproductive hormones. So it can affect testosterone production and result in declines in sex drive. It can lead to erectile dysfunction and impotence. It can negatively impact sperm production, which can cause difficulty for folks trying to conceive, if conceiving in that manner. Um, It can affect menstruation and be associated with absence or irregular menstrual cycles, more painful periods, again, reduced sex drive we see. It can also have a negative ability on conception, the health of a pregnancy, and a woman's postpartum adjustment. Then in the years of menopause, when hormones are already or perimenopause into menopause when hormones are fluctuating rapidly already, and this time frame can be characterized by depression and anxiety and mood swings as well as feelings of distress that it can just be exacerbated by chronic stress or intensify as a result. Gosh. And so because I think the final thought I'll kind of leave folks with in terms of this, if like you're recognizing any of these things kind of happening for you on a more regular basis, and some of the stuff around like heart, like heart pain and things like really, get out there to see your doc. And just more broadly speaking, it's an invitation to give yourself permission to kind of take stock of the stressors in your life and move towards making choices that support your health and well-being, however that looks for you. So yeah, there's the the overview, the high level overview of the impacts. And they're serious too.
Yeah, they are in such a long list. And, to think that it could like potentially cause heart attack and stroke, that's scary.
Yeah.
So that just, tells us to really, take that pause, take care of ourselves before situation gets out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah. There and yeah, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
true. Yeah. And I mean, there's likely other things going on in people's lives too, right? But it's just being mindful that chronic stress can really aggravate pre-existing conditions and yeah, that we just want to pay attention to these beautiful vessels that are our bodies.
Yeah. And so that brings me to my next question. So, there's a lot of talk of stress, and another word that's often accompanying that is burnout.
Mm.
So I wonder if you can tell us more about what is burnout and what causes.
Okay, for sure. We really lean into the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, which is that it's a occupational phenomenon that's the result of chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed. And so burnout is a state of distress. And chronic stress is a contributing factor to burnout. And so, what's helpful in a work context, I think, is considerations that are outlined beautifully in a book by Jennifer Moss called The Burnout Epidemic, where she outlines 6 causes of burnout, and they are work overload, a lack of control, insufficient recognition and reward, a lack of community. So think about workplace relationships with low levels of support, a lack of fairness, and a mismatch in values between our personal values and the organizational values. So those are the 6 kind of causes that are cited that we're really thinking about. And yeah, I'll stop there and just say where should we go from here, Hedieh?
Yes, and then what are the symptoms? The symptoms of burnout, are they the same as the same symptoms of stress, or could they be different?
Yeah, great question. So you might find physiologically that some of those same symptoms associated with chronic stress are present as part of as part of the fuller picture. But then again, leaning back into the World Health Organization's definition, burnout's characterized by 3 dimensions. So that would be feelings of depletion or exhaustion, having an increased mental distance from one's job or like negativity and cynicism related to the job, and then reduced feelings of professional effectiveness also comes into the picture. And so how this might show up would be feeling frustrated, being tired of coming into work, finding it hard to deal with people at work. So like potentially a lot of like interrelational stuff starts to become pretty challenging. It's also associated with being less empathetic, feelings of detachment, and just seeing work or elements related to work as being incredibly frustrating, experiencing work as unrewarding, and just like ultimately feeling like you're just going through the motion. What can be really something to be really considerate of too, I guess, is that it burnout can also lead to feelings of worthlessness. It can be associated with suicidal thoughts, and it can lead to sometimes people turning to different types of substances as a way to self-soothe and self-protect. So I think, if there are folks out there, again, call out to your audience just to say, if you're starting to feel exhausted and like you hate your job and you're beginning to feel less capable at work, you're starting to show some signs of burnout. And it's a really good time to do a little check in with yourself about that and what your next step might be. and to remind yourself that you have choice, like you always have choices. Yeah. And even if you can't leave a job, you have choices in there around how you frame your work and how you choose to approach it to do your best to protect yourself from some of the factors that might be impacting you. There's always hope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's always hope. I come from a place that there's always hope.
So obviously, like you said, people can't just leave their jobs whenever they feel burnout. And you mentioned their choices. What are some of those choices?
Yeah, gosh. Okay, can we talk about this in terms of I'll lean us back into the factors that kind of can cause burnout and how we can view them through a prevention focused lens. And I'll talk about folks in a leadership role. And then I'll talk about folks in non-leadership role, like in individual contributor roles, if that's okay. Is that cool?
Sounds good.
Okay. So we'll say we'll start with leaders. So if you're in a leadership role out there, here's your invitation to be intentional about supporting a reasonable workload that you regularly reassess with your staff, because even in that dynamic alone, you're saying something about the culture of a place, right? That there's an openness to dialogue and that there's a relationship there, which we know that type of social connection is very important for our health. And it also helps us to feel like we're resourced in a way that is really effective as a protective mechanism. And say to empower your employees to take control over their work, provide timely, specific, and individualized feedback and recognition, compensate folks appropriately and equitably for the work that they're doing. Really work on and be intentional about building open and trusting relationships by having a willingness to be appropriately vulnerable with the folks that report to you and to be accountable in a leadership role for what's going on your team. Act in alignment with whatever your organizational procedures might be or policies might be and your code of conduct. Really think about that and model behaviors that make the workplace psychologically safer. And there's beautiful resources out there around the behaviors that support psychological safety. So, modeling behaviors that make the workplace psychologically safer. It's also really important to prioritize having candid conversations with your staff about stress, about burnout, about mental health and substance use health issues in the workplace so that there's less stigma associated with these experiences. These topics don't have to be taboo. And it's very okay to come into a conversation on those topics, actually talking about how it's new to talk about. So it might feel a little clicky at first, right? And just kind of owning that. I think it's great to know where your resources are, right? So there are great resources, very applicable to workplace settings on the workplace strategies for mental health website. And you can actually search for the On the Agenda series within that platform. And it provides some awesome guidance on how to have conversations related to different psychosocial factors that impact the workplace. And then another amazing resource is Ottawa Public Health's website, and they have that talk series. So I think there's a lot of stuff out there to help people have conversations if it's new, it's a newer skill that we're trying to build. And I think too, just leaning into these topics in a non-judgmental way that's compassionate and kind of recognizes that we're all human. It creates enough safety ultimately for people to share what they need to be successful at work. And that even might include an exploration of accommodations that might be possible for people too. Right. So back to your earlier question before I go into what employees might consider doing, if you're one of those folks out there starting to feel like, oh, some of these symptoms feel like very true to my experience, consider what's your relationship with the person you report to? What does it look like? And does your workplace have an accommodations policy? And is there some way that an alternate work arrangement might support you as one possible avenue to explore? So there's the leadership bucket, kind of. Any questions there or comments before I shift to employee?
I found it very interesting because we know when in certain workplaces, leaders don't really take the time to connect and to ask questions and to be vulnerable and allow their staff to be vulnerable. So I think that is like a building block, in my opinion, that builds those connections and is part of that social support that you mentioned earlier. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, you're so quite you're spot on. And I think for those of you in operational settings too, not that it just happens in operational settings, because even in non-operational workplaces, and I'm sorry, I'm using like municipal language too, right? So it's people are busy, workloads are high, resources are low, people resources are really low in a lot of places. And so that tips the scales in a way that's not always conducive to focusing on building relationships. And so people get so consumed by their list of tasks that some of this more less tangible work can start, because it's more invisible in terms of like you're not producing something physical,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't make it any less real for the people who don't feel supported. And so I think it is like a call to say that every minute, every hour our leaders can put into building relationship and building trust with their folks is going to have a huge significance in terms of productivity and the way that people show up at work. And it's going to make the culture more dynamic and healthier overall. So yeah, we often forget about the need to focus on building trusting relationships where you can lean into and on each other. So more of that, please, in all of the workplaces out there.
Yeah. And I find like, in some smaller organizations, well, someone becomes a leader without having had any kind of leadership development training. And so they don't know that you need to spend time and build those relationships. I think the other thing is that these leaders themselves also need that support to be able to then allow them to build those connections, have those checking conversations.
You're absolutely right. There's a responsibility of any employer to ensure that people moving into leadership roles have access to appropriate skill building opportunities, whether that's formal training and skill building opportunities or mentorship opportunities, coaching opportunities, and really clear expectations too about the fact that that people less visible, less tangible, even though it can feel like a sucker punch if you're not supported at work, right? So it can have a very physical feeling for people. Yeah, but just like the very clear expectations that that's part of a huge part of the job of leaders, and to not get caught up so much in the doing. Ideally, you'd be delegating to your team who would be doing most of the doing, and the role of a leader is to coach and to help remove barriers when they come up, right? So, well, there, I just shared my position on leadership.
I feel the same, but unfortunately, not all organizations see it that way. And I think that that's one of the factors that could potentially lead to stress and burnout because employees don't feel that social support and that connection.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. So I guess the opportunity there too is, as an employee, if you're an employee out there who's not feeling like they have the support that they need from the person they report to, Are there other leaders in the organization that you work with that you're comfortable approaching to get some support from? Are there peers or colleagues in your organization or affinity groups in your organization who you can lean into for support? Because we all have an active role to play, right? We as much as we need leaders to do what they're expected to do. I mean, relationships are co-created, and we can use our own power effectively to seek out the kinds of colleagues, people, supports within our workplace. Like, we have agency too, so let's never forget that we have a role to play, and hopefully you're fortunate enough to have it even one person in your workplace that you trust. Yeah.
That makes a huge difference to
Yes.
have, like you said, even if it's just that one person that you can trust, that's impactful, I believe.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. And one can turn into more, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I also liked the word that you used to co create relationships. And going back to what you said, maybe even about accommodation and alternative work arrangements, it's up to the individual or the employee to actually ask for that, right? The leader is not a mind reader. They only know what you're telling them. So if you're not telling them what you need, then they can't rectify that situation, right?
Yes. Yes. Which again becomes a really important back to your point too, around like taking the time to build relationship. It's really hard for people to approach a leader and say, "Hey, I need this to be successful," if there's no foundational relationship
Right.
or some kind of sense of connection, right? But you're right. Our
Exactly.
leaders, yeah, leaders are mind readers and they're busy. They're busy just like you're busy out there working. So yeah. Shall we? There's a few other things that employees can do too that we can turn to.
Yeah. Please share those.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, be brave and talk to the person that you report to about your workload. So, in a context where maybe the relationship isn't quite as solid, or maybe you don't know your leader as well yet, like let's leave room for opportunity for that
Mm.
relationship to grow. You can also choose to be brave and to talk about your workload. It is it's it's work. Like, it is totally within a reasonable expectation to be able to talk workload issues with the person you report to. I'd say to remember your expertise and your knowledge and recognize the value that you bring. You were hired for a reason. And so be accountable for the work that you do. We talked about co creating relationships. So do your part in building relationship too. Don't leave it up to the leader or your colleagues alone. Like, put yourself out there a little bit. You can make that choice, right? To expand your capacity. You can make that choice to put yourself out there a little bit when it feels safe enough, given whatever your unique circumstances are. If your leader puts a conversation on the table about stress, burnout, mental health, substance use, health at work, join the conversation. And I'm not saying share all of your stuff. I'm just saying join, offer a little bit of your perspective. Gosh, this one's so fundamental, but I think we all need to be reminded of it sometimes. And that is just treat everybody around you with kindness and with dignity and with respect, because we all deserve dignity and respect. Yeah. And, back to that accommodation. If you need one, talk about it. Leverage the resources that you have available in your workplace, whatever they are, right? So maybe you have benefits. Maybe you have leave options. Maybe your workplace has an employee assistance program or peer supporters. Plan to take breaks throughout your day, refresh your skills. Like, set some growth opportunity, like goals for yourself. If you're whether you love learning or not, like set some goals for yourself in some area of your life that bring you a sense of feeling joy and vitality. Make your health and well-being a priority. I often talk about like the fundamentals. And like people are like, oh yeah, you're talking about this again, but pay attention to move like what you're eating, moving your body, getting out into nature. Try to minimize like some of the processed foods and sugar and caffeine, alcohol. Just a little bit, just even a little bit, because that trifecta, including sleep, try to get a good amount of sleep because all of that really impacts our brain and our body and just the way that we show up into a space. And as somebody who gets hangry, like I'm a person who gets hangry if I don't eat, I have to pay attention to that, right? Because I know I'm not giving of myself if I'm hungry. It's a bad scene, right?
Oh, for me, it's the lack of sleep.
Okay.
I just can't function the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, so it has an impact, right? So
Right.
the more we can, and I'm not saying it's all the responsibility of us as individuals. I'm not saying that, especially when it comes to burnout. This is like an employment problem. There's responsibility on the employer's part too. And there's ways that we make choices in our own lives that help us approach situations from a more regulated place.
Absolutely. So if we take care of ourselves, if I've had my 7 or 8 hours of sleep, the next day I'm better equipped to tackle any issues that may come up versus my brain not working, and it would be harder to find solutions, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let's do our best to just set ourselves up for success as
Yeah.
much as we can. Yeah.
And any final thoughts, anything you'd like to share about preventing stress, burnout?
Yes. Final thought. Okay. Everything that we do to protect ourselves from chronic stress, to protect ourselves, sorry, from burnout really needs an investment of time and courage. Because all of this is happening within relational and power dynamics, right? And this stuff is heavily influenced by operational and organizational culture within a workplace. And so I think just important, to consider the choices that we make at work every day because our choices can be really protective too. So I think one final thing, one nugget that comes to me, which I try to respect in my own life between the different spheres of my work even is having boundaries in place. And so I would say respect yourself enough to set boundaries and to advocate for yourself and do your part in building meaningful connections, whatever that looks like for you, right? I'm not saying there's a right way to do it. Do it in a way that works for you and know that you're worth it. You're worth the investment of time and you're worth the investment of courage. So there it is.
Thank you very much, Christina. You shared so many valuable insights into stress, burnout, what causes them, how to prevent them by taking care of ourselves, the roles of leaders, the roles of employees themselves. Thank you so much. It was a wealth of information that you shared.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure to be here.